In 1960, 19 men set out to cross Australia. 4 men made the final push north. Only 1 came home. 1 was beaten and died. 1 starved while writing to his father. 1 died with a pistol still in his hand. And the youngest, John King, was the only survivor. But this wasn't just bad luck. So, in 1860, Australia is still mostly unmapped on European charts. Most of the interior is completely unknown. Nobody has crossed it, from south to north. South Australia announces a £2,000 reward for the first expedition to cross the continent. Victoria, the rival colony, can't let South Australia win. So, the Royal Society of Victoria votes £6,000 to fund their own attempt. They start planning the most ambitious exploration party Australia has ever seen. They pick a man called Robert O'Hara Burke to lead it. Burke is an Irish-born police superintendent in Melbourne. He's 39 years old. He was in the Austrian army and the Irish police before moving to Australia. His own biographers describe him as impulsive and recklessly brave. He has never been on an exploration party in his life. He has no surveying skills, no real bush experience, and he doesn't listen to people who do. That last part is going to be what kills him. He has a habit of making fast decisions and refusing to revisit them, even when the people around him can see that they are wrong. He was chosen anyway. He wanted the job badly. He was charming, and the committee really wasn't looking for an experienced explorer. They were looking for a man who would make it to the North Coast no matter what it took. His second in command, William Wills, 26 years old, born in Devon, England, trained in medicine before becoming a surveyor. Quiet and methodical, basically the opposite of Burke in every single way. And the youngest of the senior team is a man called John King, an Irish ex-soldier who had served in the Indian Army where he was working with camels. Here's why that detail matters quite a bit, because this expedition brought camels. August 20th, 1860. The expedition leaves Royal Park in Melbourne. 19 men, 23 horses, 27 camels imported specially from India along with their handlers, 21 tons of supplies. They brought 50 gallons of rum, which Burke claimed was for reviving tired camels, of course. They brought enough food for 2 years. Total cost, roughly £12,000 to £15,000. In today's money, that's somewhere between £2 and £3 million. The most expensive expedition Australia had ever launched. The departure was a public spectacle. Around 15,000 people watched them leave Melbourne. The press called it the greatest exploration party the colony had ever assembled, and it was already in trouble. The weight of everything that they were carrying meant the expedition could barely move. Within weeks, they were behind schedule. The wagons were sinking in mud, the camels were exhausted, and Burke was furious. They reached a place called Menindee in September. They were already months behind where they needed to be. So Burke made a decision. The first decision that would later be picked apart by every historian that has ever wrote about this expedition. He split the party. Burke took a smaller, faster group and pushed ahead. He left a man called William Wright in charge of bringing the supplies up behind them. They reached a place called Cooper Creek on November the 11th, 1860. They built a depot there, a base camp where the resupply party would catch up with them. But Burke was now 5 months behind original schedule, and the resupply still hadn't arrived. He had a choice: wait at Cooper Creek for Wright to catch up, or push up for the Gulf of Carpentaria without him. So he picked 4 men: himself, Wills, King, and a sailor named Charles Gray. 6 camels and 1 horse, 12 weeks of provisions. Burke put a man called William Bra in charge of the depot at Cooper Creek. His orders to Bra were specific: wait 3 months. If we're not back by then, you can leave. December the 16th, 1860, the four men set out to the north coast of Australia, a cross-country no European has ever mapped, 2,000 miles away. What followed was one of the most punishing overland journeys in exploration history. Wet season, flooded rivers, mud. Burke drove them harder than the camels could really go. February the 11th, 1861, they reached the mangrove country at the edge of the Gulf of Carpentaria. They had done it. They crossed Australia. They never actually saw the open sea. Tide and mangrove swamp blocked them, but they were in the saltwater. The crossing was real. And here's where the problems started. They were already weeks behind. They were already running out of food, and they had to turn around and walk all the way back through the same country in the same conditions with less food than they had come in with. While they were walking back, they didn't know it yet, but a man at Cooper Creek Depot was about to carve 3 letters into a tree that would mark the worst 9 hours in Australian exploration history. The return journey broke them. The wet season had flooded every single river. The camels were dying one by one or being killed off for food. The horse was already gone. The men were starving. Their daily ration was barely enough to keep a person standing, and one of them was taking more than his fair share. March the 25th, 1861, Wills caught Charles Gray secretly eating a flour porridge. Without permission, Wills recorded it in his diary in 2 clean sentences. Gray said he had a bad stomach illness, that he'd been taking the food because he was starving. Burke had him beaten. The accounts vary on exactly what happened. Some say Burke struck Gray himself. Others say he ordered the beating. What's clear is that Gray was punished physically while in a state of advanced starvation. He didn't recover. He couldn't walk. The other 3 carried him the best that they could. April the 17th, 1861, Gray died. The 3 survivors were now so weak they could barely dig a grave for him. It took them the entire day. Starving men in the bush, scraping a shallow hole in a hard ground for a man who had been beaten 3 weeks earlier. The 4-day delay caused by burying Gray would matter more now than they knew, because at Cooper Creek Depot, the rescue that they were walking towards, the clock had already started. Cooper Creek Depot, April the 21st, 1861. William Bra has been waiting for 4 months and 1 week. His orders were to wait there for 3 months. He'd been there longer than he was told. His men are sick. One man called Patton can barely stand. Bra and another man called McDonough are showing signs of scurvy. The supplies they have left aren't going to be enough for the journey back south. So Bra makes the decision they have to leave. They have to go back to Menindee while they can still walk. The morning of April the 21st, he prepares to leave. Before he goes, he carves into a coolie battery 3 letters, D-I-G, dig. Then below, in smaller letters, 3 feet northwest, April the 21st, 1861. 3 feet northwest of the tree, he buries a bottle. Inside the bottle, a note explaining that the depot party has waited as long as it could and is leaving today. He also buries food, flour, oatmeal, sugar and rice, enough to keep starving men alive for weeks. Around 10 in the morning, he covers the camp to make it look untouched. Then he and his men head south. 9 hours later, 7:30 in the evening, the 3 survivors of the dash to the Gulf stagger into the depot. Burke, Wills and King. They've covered 30 miles in the final day. They have 1.5 pounds of dried meat left between 3 of them. They find the tree, they read the carving, and they dig. They find the bottle, and then they find the food. They read Bra's notes. The rescue party they have been walking back for 4 months left this morning, they missed it by 9 hours. Imagine that. They have been walking 4,000 miles and they are starving. They have just buried Gray in shallow ground. They have walked 30 miles in the final day with the promise of food and a rescue. They get there, the food is there, but the rescue has just left. And here is where Burke makes his final decision. King wants to follow Bra's trail south. Bra is only hours ahead. They might catch up. Wills agrees with King. The old route is the route that they know. Burke disagrees. He has a choice. Follow Bra's tracks south, the men he is hours behind on a route that they know, or walk 150 miles southwest into country none of them has ever seen towards a sheep station with the worst name in Australian exploration history. The place is called Mount Hopeless. He chose Mount Hopeless. King and Wills defer to him. He is still the commander. Burke writes a note explaining their new plan and puts it inside of the bottle. He reburies the bottle, and then he makes one final mistake. He doesn't change the carving on the tree. He doesn't add anything to it. From the outside, the depot looks like the way Bra left it originally, completely untouched, as if they never got there. 2.5 weeks later, May the 8th, 1861, William Bra is walking back to Cooper Creek. He has finally met up with William Wright. That was the man from earlier that was supposed to be bringing the resupply up months earlier. Together, Bra and Wright decide to check the depot one more time just to be sure. They arrive at the tree. The carving still says dig. 3 feet northwest, April the 21st, 1861. There is no other message, no other carving. The depot looks exactly like how Bra left it. They walk around the area, they see no footprints, no fresh signs of human movement, so they just assume that Burke's party never made it back to camp. So they turn around and they leave. At that moment, Burke and Wills and King are about 35 miles away, lost and starving in a country that they don't know, trying to walk to a sheep station that they are never going to find. They have just once again been within 2 days of the exact rescue party that they thought they'd missed, and nobody thought to dig. The note that Burke left in that bottle, under the 3 feet of dirt, exactly where Bra had buried it before, would not be read by another European for months. By then, 2 of the 3 men would be dead. Burke, Wills and King didn't make it to Mount Hopeless. They didn't even get close. They wandered back to Cooper Creek. Their last camel dies. They ate what they could and then they collapsed. But they were not alone in this country. They had never been alone. The Yadruwanda people had been living at Cooper Creek for thousands of years, long before this expedition arrived and long before any European map of the continent had ever existed. They had been watching the 3 men for weeks. They had food and water. They knew exactly how to survive in this country. And they offered. Wills writes it in his diary. May the 17th, the Yaruanda give them fish. May the 8th and 9th, they give them more fish, a plant called narandu, and a small animal roasted in their skins. They invite the men into their camp. They share their food. Wills records the kindness in his diary. He starts calling them in his own words, my friends, the blacks. He's beginning to understand something important. The Yaruanda knew where the food was and where the water sources were. These people understood this country in ways the expedition couldn't have even imagined. But Burke can't accept the help fully. According to his own biographer, Burke couldn't bring himself to associate himself with the Aboriginal people on equal terms. At one point, and this is documented, he fired his pistol over the heads of the group of the Yaruanda who were bringing fish just to drive them away. He fired on the people who were trying to feed him. The Yaruanda didn't stop offering though. They kept coming back. They kept offering food, but Burke wouldn't take it anymore. He wouldn't ask them how, and he wouldn't let his expedition depend on what the Aboriginal people knew. And that was the decision that killed him, because there was one specific piece of Aboriginal knowledge he needed to know about one specific plant, the nardoo. Nardoo is a seed of a small fern that grows near waterways in central Australia. The Yarrawonda have been grinding the seeds into flour and making cakes from them for thousands of years. When properly prepared, nardoo is nutritious and it can sustain a person for weeks. When prepared in the wrong way, eaten without the right process, it does something terrible. Nardoo contains a chemical called thiominase. It is an enzyme, and it's an enzyme that destroys vitamin B1, also called thiamine, inside the human body. The Yarrawonda knew this, but without really knowing the chemistry. Their preparation method neutralized the toxin by soaking, leaching, grinding, and roasting. They had been doing it for thousands of years because it worked. Burke and Wills tried to copy them. They watched the Yarrawonda people prepare the seeds, and they tried to do the same, but they skipped a few steps. They didn't soak it for long enough or process it in the same way the Aboriginal people did. And as they ate the nardoo, it started destroying their bodies from the inside. This was confirmed by science only in the 1970s. A study published in 1977 identified the thiominase mechanism in Marsilea drummondii, the proper name for nardoo. Burke and Wills were eating. They were eating a lot, and the food that they were eating was actually killing them. They had no idea. William Wills is dying, and he knows it. He's been writing the whole time. His diary records everything that has happened with his body, every failed meal, every drop in pulse and weight. He is a surveyor. He is documenting his own death the way that he would document a survey. In late 1861, he writes his last full diary entry. He records that the nardoo gave him appetite and satisfaction, but in his own words, seems to give us no nutriment. He notes his pulse is down to 48 beats per minute. His limbs, he writes, are nearly skin and bone. Around June 27th, he writes one more thing. Not a diary entry, a letter to his father. The letter survives. You can read it today. It's in a museum in Melbourne. He tells his father this is probably the last letter he will ever send. He explains where they are and what they have done. He explains that they crossed Australia to the north coast and returned to the one place that they had every right to expect rescue. They found it abandoned. He doesn't blame anyone or curse anyone. He just writes it calmly, in the careful handwriting of a man that has almost no strength left. And he signs off with one line. The last line he ever wrote, "My spirits are excellent." Wills told Burke and King to leave him, to go find the Yarrawonda. He couldn't walk anymore. King returned a few days later to find Wills dead, still propped up against the tree with his diary nearby. After Wills died, Burke and King kept walking. Burke was weakening faster than King. He couldn't keep going anymore. He sat down under a tree by a creek. He gave King his pistol and his pocket watch and told King to leave him with the gun in his hand. Burke wanted to die alone, with his weapon in his hand. He wrote 2 short notes in his last hours. They were later found next to his body. The first one said, "King has behaved nobly. He has stayed with me to the last." It explained that he was sending King away because King had a better chance of survival alone. He asked whoever found him to remember that King had not abandoned him. The second note was bitter, just one line. "We have fulfilled our task, but we have been abandoned." King obeyed Burke's orders. He left, but he came back the next day. Burke was dead, the pistol still in his hand, unfired. King was now alone, in the middle of Australia, starving and weak, the only survivor of the 4 men that walked north. The Yarrawonda found King wandering. They had every reason not to help him. The expedition had refused their food, Burke had fired on them. The men who had walked into their country had treated them like obstacles rather than real people. They could have left King to die, but they didn't. They took him away and they fed him. They gave him possum-skinned cloak. They prepared the nardoo properly so that he could eat it without it killing him, and they taught him how to do it. He lived with them for over 2 months. King later said in his own words that they felt compassion for him when they understood he was alone and gave him plenty to eat. He contributed by shooting birds for them with the pistol Burke had left him. He became part of their camp. September the 15th, 1861, a rescue party led by Alfred Howitt reached the Yarrawonda camp. They found King sitting among the Aboriginal people, barely able to speak, but alive. The Yarrawonda had saved this man's life when his own people had given up looking for him. Howitt's party gave them small gifts in thanks. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was acknowledgement in that moment that one group of people had done what the other couldn't. They had saved a stranger. Burke's and Wills' bodies were recovered later that year. They were given temporary burial near Cooper Creek. In January 1863, their remains were brought back to Melbourne for a state funeral, the first state funeral in Victoria's history. Their bodies lay in state for 2 weeks. Over 100,000 people came to see them. They were buried as tragic heroes. John King came home too. He was paraded as the survivor. He gave one major interview. He was uncomfortable with the attention though. He was, in his own words, ashamed to be the only one who lived. He never really recovered though. He suffered nightmares and his body never fully healed. He aged rapidly. He died of tuberculosis on January the 15th, 1872. He was either 30 or 33 depending on which records you use. The Yarrawonda, the people who had actually saved his life, were almost completely erased from the public memory of the story for over 100 years. What kills you about this story isn't that Burke and Wills were unlucky. It was that every single time rescue appeared, they could have taken it. The depot was there, the food was buried. Bra came back. The Yarrawonda kept offering food and shelter for weeks. Wills' body never had to be a body. Burke's pistol never had to be unfired. The people in this story who couldn't accept help were the men leading it. The country wasn't empty. It was full of people who knew exactly how to live in it. Burke just wouldn't ask for help. In 2016, the Australian government formally renamed the National Heritage Site at Cooper Creek. It is no longer just the Burke and Wills site. It is now officially the Burke, Wills, King and Yarrawonda National Heritage Place. 150 years late, but finally, the people who saved John King's life are part of the story they should have been a part of from the very beginning.